Of all the candidates running against Dana Rohrabacher in California's 48th Congressional District, one of them stands out the most, affectionately earning our label, the Enigma. Meet native Orange County resident and lifelong Republican Paul Martin. Paul is a GOP centrist who claims to be the most despised candidate in the race, who is hated equally by people on both sides. Frequently called a RINO and no fan of President Trump, he unabashedly says he would not have it any other way. In one moment, he will criticize the Republican Party, give support to the homeless, and champion issues concerning the children of illegal immigrants, all making you think he really is a Republican in name only. But in the next moment, he will express his admiration of Ronald Reagan, give support to a strong military, want limited government, and fight to uphold the Second Amendment. Confused? So were we. We met with him recently to see if we could figure him out. The outcome may surprise you. Thank you for meeting with us tonight. Why don't we start with your background? Tell us about yourself.
Well, I'm an Orange County native. My parents are still here in Orange County. My mother's an Italian immigrant. She immigrated legally here with her family when she was a teenager from Italy. And my father is Mexican American. Actually, my last name is Martin, like Ricky Martin. He grew up in Orange, California, and he remembers no Mexican signs, and he's light-skinned, and he was lucky enough, if you will, to go to a segregated school for light-skinned kids. A lot of his cousins and friends right in the neighborhood had to go 3 miles away to a school for dark-skinned kids right here in Orange County. So yeah, I'm from Orange County. I grew up here.
That is quite a sordid history of Orange County right there.
Yeah, and it's important, I think, because I think oftentimes people want to say issues of racism or, go all the way back to, the 1960s, and they do, but I still think that some of that sentiment is with us today. But anyway, I went to UCLA for college. I did that in my 20s and 30s. I took a bit of an untraditional route, and I studied philosophy, ethics, and political philosophy. And then later I went on to get a master's degree from Talbot School of Theology at Biola University with another degree in ethics.
Okay, so my next question was going to be how that's going to help you in Congress, but it's kind of obvious how ethics and philosophy can help you in Congress, but why don't you explain that to our viewers?
Well, I'm interested in big questions and issues of human behavior and what's right. Ethics is a study of what one should do or shouldn't do, I think is a crucial issue. Today, in fact, many people think that character and integrity don't even matter anymore in an elected official. What really matters is just the policy. I strongly disagree with that. I'm interested in kind of the debate, if you will, between Republicans tend to be big on free will. All human beings have a free will and a free choice. So if you're homeless or if you're poor, suck it up and pull yourself up by the bootstraps. It's a very Republican idea. And that idea goes all the way back to the Greeks. Democrats generally tend to think, well, sometimes people need help. I have children, and sometimes I definitely parent from a point of view of you better take responsibility for your life, but sometimes kids need some help along the way. And the Democrats generally tend to perhaps go too far in wanting to get the government involved in helping each other. But I studied, John Locke and Rousseau and Kant and Thomas Hobbes and kind of the big thinkers that created really ultimately what ended up being the United States. And the U.S. is built on a Lockean principle. It's really based on a principle of minimal government. The government really should only be involved to protect people, free speech and property rights. Everything else the government should stay out of. And ultimately, I think it's a very compelling idea, and one that as a Republican I want to continue to fight for, though I certainly don't go as far as people like Dana Rohrabacher, who, many people, good, smart people, think the government should basically be out of people's business. But I think organizations like Child Protective Services and the police and the military are fundamentally important to our country and our democracy.
Now, you mentioned being Mexican American and segregated schools.
Sure.
So, what are your thoughts on the sanctuary cities or sanctuary state?
It's such a complicated issue, and what's unfortunate today is how polarized our country is. So essentially what you have is a situation where we are not going to deport 12 million to 15 million people. There's no way to do that. Even Donald Trump has said we do not want to deport 15 million or 12 million, whatever the number is. And yet, in saying that I don't want to deport 12 million illegal aliens, people on the far right are going to say, well, you're for amnesty. It's like this little trick. So let me tell you what I am for. I am for the strongest borders possible to make sure that we keep people who aren't here legally out of the country. That's where it starts. Secondly, we deport any criminals immediately as soon as there's a crime. It gets difficult when it comes to profiling. I mean, we had Judge Arpaio in Arizona who had no problem violating the laws of his state and the laws of the nation in profiling people based on their race. And I happen to be in agreement with the courts that sanctioned him for doing so. So with respect to specifically sanctuary cities and states, I don't believe that it's a slippery slope. So Governor Brown said, sorry, federal government, we're going to do what we want. And even though there might be good ethical basis for what he's doing, perhaps, if our states start saying to the federal government, I'm so sorry, or our cities say to the federal government, I'm so sorry, we know it's right, that's a slippery slope. I mean, we had a civil war based on a state, South Carolina, saying they were the first to say, I'm sorry, Washington, but we're going to do what we want. And I think it's a very slippery slope to begin, for states to begin telling the federal government what they will and won't do.
So then what are your opinions on legalizing marijuana?
Well, here's what I think about marijuana. I mean, Dana Rohrabacher is a big champion of weed. He likes weed. He's admitted to using it, maybe for medical purposes, I think, perhaps, and that's fine. I'm concerned for our children. I know, I grew up, I raised my kids here. They've gone to school here, and I've seen the effects of the number one gateway drug, marijuana. And so while part of me, the libertarian streak in me that says, get the government out, just let this be, I'm on Dana's team, kind of a libertarian view, get the government out of this and let it be legal. I'm worried about drugs in our nation. I'm worried about marijuana being a gateway drug. I'm worried about the studies that show that cannabis used in the teenage years can have long-term effect on the brain. Now, people are going to say, well, we're not legalizing it for teenagers, but we all know, when you could drive up the 55 freeway and see 5, 6, 7, 8 marijuana signs, and you have children in their car on the way to soccer practice seeing the big marijuana leaf, that's what Dana Rohrabacher is advocating for. I just don't think it's good for our children. Ultimately, and I know a lot of moms, and virtually everyone I know that has kids in junior high or high school aren't happy that marijuana is just being treated now as kind of like, cigarettes or something.
Now, I have 2 questions based on everything you just said. The first one, you said stronger borders.
Yeah.
How do you propose stronger borders?
Well, I mean, President Obama started a wall, as we all know. And I, firmly believe in Donald Trump's vision. I was not a Trump supporter. I didn't vote for Donald Trump, and I had many issues with him. But he, I believe, has shown clear leadership in at least starting with this idea of whatever it takes, we need to secure the border. And he has been crystal clear. He has not equivocated from that. It's not quite as easy as build the wall on day one, as we know, because he hasn't done that. But we have to get serious about, it's not necessarily just a wall, it could be cameras, it could be surveillance, but making sure that people cannot come into this country easily. If that would have been the case 20 years ago, we wouldn't be where we are today.
So what about the National Guard at the border right now?
Sure. I mean, I think a lot of that's theatrics, if I'm honest. It sounds brave, we're going to send our army down to the border to keep all these rapists out of the country. This is what gets me as a Republican, but also as someone whose father is Mexican and remembers some of this discrimination. President Trump a few weeks ago was referring to a caravan, and he said something like, and they're raping people at rates we've never seen before. Now, of course, that is a purely racist statement. Number one, he doesn't know what rates anyone's being raped. But that's the kind of rhetoric that fires up a certain base on the far right that, is unnecessary. I don't like the stereotype of Mexicans. And look, I'm a white guy, I have blue eyes. Nobody goes around thinking I'm a Mexican. But I don't like the stereotype of, Mexicans or people from the South being rapists and criminals. We know that overwhelmingly they aren't. 99.9% of them are hardworking people that are family oriented. And we know that. And yet we like to find these outlier cases of crime and try to make that, using it as a tool to scare people. And I just don't think that's right. As an ethicist, I don't think it's right. We all know many people who are illegals, and we are not afraid that they're coming in to rape us. Dana Rohrabacher a while ago, they were asking him about Russia and his ties to Vladimir Putin. And he said, well, my voters aren't concerned about that, which might be true. They're concerned about illegals coming in and raping them. That's just wrong, and it's untrue.
Now, what about in Tennessee? They just raided a meat packing plant and gathered up all the illegal workers. And there was about 500 kids left without parents to come home to from school. Mm-hmm. So how can we keep these families together if these kids are born in America and their parents are illegal immigrants? Well, how can we keep these families together? Because we can't deport the kids.
Right. And again, if the Republican Party is the party of family values, which for a long time it touted, it claimed to be the party of family values, then it would never break up a family, even if that family is an illegal family. It's traumatizing for a child. There are cases right now where parents have been separated from their children. And I don't care how far right you are, it's traumatizing and abusive to take a child away from its mother. It does not matter if the mother came illegally or she came with her husband illegally or the father came illegally. We should never take children away from their parents. The children are innocent. The DACA young children and young people, they're not all children, are innocent. They came here out of no choosing. And so while I think my party, and I will say, I like the leadership of Trump on the wall. I like the idea of facing this issue. It doesn't mean that we have to become barbarians in the process. It doesn't mean we have to show up to city council meetings and get this far from people and scream into their face. It's not good PR for the party. If I was the Republican Party's PR team, I would say, leave those people out of the city hall meetings, have them put on a suit and tie, and act dignified in a civil way, and let's never take children away from their parents.
What about aerospace engineering? It seems a lot of those companies are leaving California. What can you do to bring it back?
Well, I do know, we looked this up, my staff, that when Dana Rohrabacher came to office in 1989, there were over 300,000 aerospace jobs here. Currently, there are less than 100,000 aerospace jobs here. There are many reasons for that, and I just think with respect to jobs like aerospace jobs and industries like aerospace, that our district is one of the jewels of the country. I mean, just drive the coast. People come here by the millions. And I think we need a leader that will be far more innovative and be a much better visionary. So the question to me is, why didn't we replace those aerospace jobs with tech jobs? Why did Elon Musk move to LA instead of Orange County? We certainly have a beautiful climate. We certainly have a very clean and safe district. Why haven't we replaced those enormous industrial buildings that had those aerospace jobs in this district with tech jobs and with green jobs? And to me, it's an issue of leadership. Dana Rohrabacher is famously known as someone who likes to go to Russia a lot. And I think we need a leader that will spend far more time here being a champion for this district in enticing some of these big companies, some that are in the Silicon Valley, to come here to beautiful, sunny Southern California.
Now, when you're out on the campaign trail and you're talking to people, what are the biggest complaints you're hearing and how can you address those?
One of the things I hear often is frankly, who's our congressman again? And oh, I've heard that name before. But a massive disconnect between the voters, and this sounds political, and I am not being political. I'm telling you what the voters tell me because that's the question you asked. There is a disconnect between Dana Rohrabacher and these voters. Most of them say, I've heard his name. Is that a woman? I mean, this is what they tell me. And so the voters here, housing is incredibly expensive. It's incredibly hard to get a well-paying job to pay rent or mortgage. I have a family, and so I have a lot of friends that raise kids, and they're barely making ends meet. And these are people with college degrees. These are people that are hardworking. It's not an issue of not being able to work hard enough. And so the number one thing I hear is there's not a congressman, congresswoman who is entrenched, embedded in the lives of the families in the district. I hear it all the time. The second thing I hear about is, again, I brought it up, but just the housing cost. We have a massive problem here. The real estate just continues to go up. Less than 10% of young couples can afford to buy a house. The rent costs are astronomical. And that is something that this district is going to have to get used to, and it's going to, again, need a champion that will be able to drive better jobs, because that's going to be the only solution. We're not going to reduce the escalating appreciation in housing costs.
Are there any committees you're interested in joining?
Yeah, I would like to be part of the ethics committee. Kind of is natural for me. But I am concerned, frankly, not because I studied ethics and not because for most of my life I've been involved in nonprofit work or pastoral work, or I worked as a director for a homeless agency, March of Dimes, and so I've given most of my life to humanitarian issues. But I do think the climate in our country, even what's happening right now with President Trump, and many people think this is all a hoax, and all of these lawsuits are, being orchestrated by Democrats, even though actually...
The deep state.
The deep state, yeah, the deep state. But I mean, we know that Bob Mueller is a Republican, and we know that Christopher Wray, the head of the FBI, is a Republican, and we know that Rod Rosenstein is a Republican. This isn't something being orchestrated by Democrats, but we seem to be losing our ethical or moral fabric. And I'm not blaming the right, I'm not blaming the left, but I'm saying that when you have people that are saying that personal morality and character and integrity don't really matter that much. What really matters are tax policies. I become concerned as a parent and as a citizen. So I would want to serve on the ethics committee.
What about the Russia investigation? Would you be a part of that with the ethics committee, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think a couple things. I think we need to all understand that there is absolutely no question that Russia not only meddled in our election, but that they are currently meddling not just in our election, but they have hacked into our electrical grids. This isn't something that Democrats are proposing. This is something that Donald Trump's own appointees, again, Christopher Wray, the head of the FBI, John Huntsman, the ambassador to Russia, that Donald Trump appointed. There is no doubt that Vladimir Putin and Russia are using a very old technique of spreading propaganda and dispersing it into countries. That's what happened in 2016, and it's continuing to happen. And so I'm incredibly concerned because as a Republican, my number one issue, and it's on my website, on my issues page, at the very top is national security. Because the number one oath that an elected official takes is to protect the country from enemies, foreign and domestic. And so we have a country that's using 21st century warfare, which is, to wage war means to weaken. Mm-hmm. It doesn't necessarily mean bombs. And so what we have in our country right now is a lot of division, a lot of memes that show up. And so I would want to sanction Russia. Dana Rohrabacher is known in Russia as Putin's favorite congressman. You can Google Russia and Rohrabacher and you'll get 10 pages of articles that have been written about him meeting with Julian Assange, his own members, Republican members in Congress sanctioning him. He's been looked at by Robert Mueller, by the Senate, by the committee members in the House. We as a country need to come together and understand that that Vladimir Putin is a master manipulator, and what he's doing to our country is sowing pandemonium pandemonium into it. And to me, that is an issue of ethics, because again, as a representative, there is no greater duty than to protect the nation. I want to say one thing that's really important, because you asked, what do voters ask me about? And you know what they don't ever ask me about, really, is Russia. And what I've done in this campaign is I've actually done the most politically incorrect thing I could do. I've made Russia the #1 issue in my campaign. I've gone to New York. I've met with the leaders of the think tanks, the Republican, neoconservative think tanks that are concerned with what Russia's doing. And I've come back and I've taken that message to the voters here. And most of them say, well, that kind of just sounds like, why is that such a big deal? And what I'm trying to say to the voters is there is no bigger deal. When you have a foreign power that has access to our electrical grids and could shut them down, this is a huge issue, and we can't be blind to it. You know, Winston Churchill for 10 years or more was mocked and ridiculed because he really understood what Hitler was about. He saw it way before anyone else did, and he was unpopular because he was so concerned with the national security of the allies, in particularly his own nation. And as a candidate, I'm not going to be politically correct and sweep this issue under the rug. It is the single greatest threat to our country, and Dana Rohrabacher is known as the single greatest lobbyist for Vladimir Putin. He literally lobbies on behalf of Vladimir Putin to have sanctions removed. This is what Dana Rohrabacher does, and it's part of the reason why these people wonder, where is he? He's in Russia. He's meeting with Julian Assange. That's what our congressman does.
I mean, as a member of Congress, isn't he on a committee that he has to meet with Russia?
Right, and that's what his one of his many alibis is. Well, that's what I'm supposed to do. But he is not supposed to be questioned for potentially being a Russian spy like he was by the FBI or the CIA. So this has gone way beyond, I have business in Russia. He met with Julian Assange on his own dime. He paid for it himself, and he came back because Julian Assange told Dana Rohrabacher, tell President Trump that Russia didn't meddle in our elections. And Dana Rohrabacher literally believed Julian Assange over 16 intelligence agencies. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, why would our congressman believe Julian Assange over our 16 intelligence agencies? He's called the Russia meddling a hoax countless times. He also calls global warming a hoax, as an aside, and he called the Charlottesville riot a staged event put on by the Democrats, staged, and I quote. So, I think voters need to know that, look, we need a competent congressman that's going to spend time in this district, and, it's the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. And when you are so embroiled in protecting, Dana likes to talk about being a patriot now. I think that might be his campaign strategy now. I'm a patriot. I'm a Republican. My first vote ever was for Ronald Reagan. And I loved Reagan because he had guts. He had the guts to call Moscow, the Soviet Union, an evil empire. He had the guts to tell Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Vladimir Putin called the collapse of the Soviet Union the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. And Dana Rohrabacher is known as Putin's favorite congressman. And the voters here need to know that it is the single biggest issue in this race.
You mentioned all the propaganda Russia is doing here, but aren't we doing the same thing in other countries and over in Russia?
Absolutely not. No, we don't create memes and videos and disperse them and hack into their, we'll hack into their systems for sure. But the idea that we wage propaganda wars in Western countries' elections, absolutely not. And it's a great talking point. Dana likes to talk about it. We do that as well. And think about that for a second. Well, we do it too, so we should let them do it to us. Like, I'm a Republican because we were the gutsy, strong Reagan party. And now we have Dana Rohrabacher telling us, well, we do it too, so it's not that big of a deal. That's not the America I want to serve. I want to serve the America that stops any foreign invader, whether it's in a physical sense or a cyber sense, from messing with our democracy.
So what about the Hillary Clinton email scandal?
Yeah, so for the record, and again, a lot of Republicans think, well, he's not a real Republican. I didn't vote for Hillary Clinton. I thought Hillary Clinton she was shady. We need to understand that the Hillary Clinton email situation was investigated, and there were no charges filed against her. That happened. We need to understand that currently we have a Republican executive branch. We have Jeff Sessions as our Attorney General. If there was enough evidence to bring charges or even bring it up again, they would be doing that right now, but they're not. And so clearly she took these emails, she deleted the emails and all of that. We have record of others doing this as well, including Jared Kushner. And so I would just think that if there was enough evidence to convict Hillary, they would bring this issue up again. Trump is already a year and a half into his presidency. Hillary has not been brought before the DOJ.
What about people that would say that's just this deep state?
Yeah, I mean, there's an old, I'm a philosopher, and it's a very old, conspiracy theories are funny. I mean, if there was an invisible cat right here in front of me, we wouldn't be able to see it, right? And so we can't see it, therefore there's an invisible cat here. And that's how conspiracy theories work. So if there was a deep state, we wouldn't even know about it. Well, we don't know about it. Therefore, there's a deep state. It's a logical fallacy. It's technically called affirming the consequent, which doesn't really matter. But there's no deep state. I don't believe in conspiracy theories myself.
Costa Mesa Brief just produced a video. It was the grand opening of Dana Rohrabacher's new headquarters. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm not going to be kind to someone who defends a human rights abuser that just launched a chemical weapons attack on NATO soil in England. Trump even imposed sanctions on it. And so when I hear Dana standing up and talking about being a patriot, again, a patriot to me is somebody who has the guts to stand up to not just Mexicans and illegal aliens. There was a shooting at the YouTube headquarters two weeks ago, and Dana Rohrabacher happened to be interviewed on Fox Business. And before they even knew who the shooter was, he said, well, this could be an illegal immigrant. Right? I mean, this is the mentality of a guy that wants to blame illegal immigrants for everything. And I want to sanction and deport anyone who's an illegal immigrant that commits a crime. But I also want to stand up to a country that is attacking us. Dana sent out an email a little while ago, and he said, dear, whoever, I am emailing you from behind enemy lines. This is his email. I'm reading it.
I've seen that email.
California has been usurped by foreign powers. It is truly a Red Dawn situation. I mean, this guy's serious. I mean, the title of it is Behind the California Communist Curtain. I'm concerned that, something's not right. This is not a communist state. There is a foreign power called Russia that is attacking and trying to weaken our democracy. Those are the facts. And Dana wants to use tactics like this to scare people that they're going to be raped tonight in our district by Mexicans. We know that's not the case.
Now, final question. You did mention the voters aren't asking about Russia. So if that's the biggest issue for you, what will you tell the voters to make them vote for you instead of Rohrabacher?
Well, I love your question. Like I said, I'm a Republican, but I am a moderate. Reagan is known for standing up to Russia first, but I think perhaps his second greatest legacy is he was president for 7 of the years. Tip O'Neill was the Speaker of the House. Tip O'Neill was about as liberal as they get. He was a New England liberal. And those two men struck up the most beautiful friendship because both of them thought what was worse than stagnation. There was nothing worse than stagnation. And so they were able to compromise on countless bills. And Reagan ended up raising money for Tip O'Neill, later on. And so as a moderate, I'm despised by people on both sides all day long. Go to my Twitter account, elect Paul Martin, and you're going to see people on the left telling me I'm complicit because I'm a Republican still and Donald Trump's a Republican, and by remaining a Republican, I'm somehow complicit in the Trump administration. You have people on the far right that call me a RINO and, Republican in name only. But I think these two extremes, the Dana Rohrabacher, Scott Baugh side, way over Donald Trump's side, is too far right, in my view. And Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and you have the far left over there. And I think what our nation needs are people that are left of center, right of center, standing for their principles, but we are all Americans. we shouldn't hate each other. We should work to form compromises. Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government except all the others. And the idea there is that it's complex, but we should be able to get along and get things done. Right now in Washington, D.C., it's a complete battlefield. The left hates the right hates the left. I want to be a representative. You know, I have Democrats voting for me. I'm proud of it. And I'll be willing to be called a RINO by people on the far right any day of the week. I love this country as much as anyone else.